topics. One of those has been destigmatizing mental health issues.
Yes, they absolutely can be challenging. And can you imagine, as a parent and your child is dealing with mental illness? Well, my guest today was at a loss when her 8-year-old son began acting out and even attempted to take his own life. And if you're a parent who has a troubled child, you'll want to watch this interview coming up a little bit later on.
We're also going to feature a woman whose Alzheimer's diagnosis was not the end of her story. And also, you recently caught up with Justin Burke in Austin, Texas.
I certainly did, and Justin's got a new book out. It's called More Than Like, Staying True to You in a Socially Media-Obsessed Generation.
Wow,
yeah.
That's a lot of words.
That's a mouthful, too. Yeah.
That sounds super interesting. Let's go and hear that conversation.
Social media is a very powerful tool. There's lots of positives, but a lot of negatives as well. Cyberbullying, probably the biggest, and we're talking a lot about that. And joining us is a young man here in Austin, Texas. His name is Justin Burke. Justin, you're a musician. You're involved in social media. In fact, you got up to a, 1.5 million followers.
Yes.
And during that time, though, you started to encounter people, and they had some pretty interesting stories to tell you.
Absolutely. I mean, over my time as a musician, really, I got so many different messages from teens just talking about the self-worth issues or the cyberbullying that they'd be having on social media. And I was dealing with the same thing, and everybody that I knew that was on social media was dealing with it, but I felt like nobody was really talking about it, or nobody was talking about it where teens would listen to it. And so I decided at that point to take a year off from music and write the book More Than Like, to hopefully share some stories and encouragement for teens that they shouldn't, they should find their worth in God rather than from social media hype.
What are you hearing as you're interacting then? And I know obviously you can't talk to everybody, and that's why you wrote the book. But what are you hearing from them? Is that helping as they're saying it's not so important that I get all these likes and people want to have that affirmation? Are they turning to God? Are they finding their value in Him?
Absolutely. There was one story even in Indonesia where the Amazon wasn't in Indonesia, and I had an audiobook and I got a message and I said, just share the audiobook, send it with whoever you can. And a lot of the friends were dealing with just getting their worth caught up in it, but through hearing the words and just through hearing that kind of encouragement in the Bible verses and different scriptures that are around that, they really started to find peace, at least the messages that they sent back to me, and that's what makes it all worth it.
So you're seeing young people then are coming free, and not only young people, but this book is now being shared as an example in a prison in Texas. Oh. Tell me about that.
Amazing. I got a message that a chaplain at a women's prison center here in Texas took a photocopy of one of the chapters in my book all about dealing with hate, and she sent it through the prison. And I'll be honest, that story made me tear up when I read about it, because when you write something, you can only wish that it would get into a place like that and be able to show encouragement somewhere like that. And I never would have imagined that it would have ended up in a women's prison center, but that's what God can do. Right?
How about, now I know your parents are pastors here in Austin, Texas, and we love your mom and dad, and John and Kathy, great people.
Thank you.
Growing up, though, in the church, tell me about your experience with Jesus.
Well, yeah, so I grew up in the church, and a lot of people would say, oh, you're a pastor's kid. Wasn't that so hard? Wasn't that so difficult? It's not your own faith. And yes, I grew up and I heard it a lot, but that doesn't mean anything if I didn't commit to it myself. And so I decided to commit to it myself about in middle school, and it's been going ever since, and it's been wonderful. I've absolutely loved it.
Now, what would you say to young people and the parents of young people when it comes to relationship with Jesus? How should we, as parents, grandparents, handle that? Because a lot are turning away from the church, especially down here in the U.S.
Oh, yeah. I would say that it's number one. It's the most important thing. I write in the book, there was at one point where I had millions of people tuning onto my show every week, everything I had ever dreamed of, and it was the loneliest and unhappiest I've ever been in my entire life. And that's when I really was reminded, oh my goodness, none of this matters if I'm not pointing people to God. And that was really the point when I was like, okay, I've got to take a break. I've got to write the book, and I've got to give back to teens in this way, because we're all dealing with these things on social media, and it's such a new technology where I feel like we don't know how, as parents or grandparents, how do we help encourage our kids to get into the Word or get into scriptures and lay off the phone right? And so I just hope that my book can help encourage those teens to do that.
So in the book, you've got 30 daily inspirations.
Yes.
What is the goal of that, and what are some of the things that are in your heart that you want young people, and those are a little, maybe older than young, to learn?
Yeah, well, I go over things like self-worth, the comparison trap, even purpose in life, giving your life to God. All those kinds of things I go over in the 30 daily readings. And I broke it up into 30 daily readings. It's about 5 minutes a day because, let's be honest, nobody wants to read nowadays. I like to read. I'm a dork, though. Many teens don't like reading. And
well, it's not just teens. I think because we're getting our information on the phone. I mean, I get like news, and a lot of the things that I watch are on my phone, and I think that's hitting all generations, and it's important because we can use social media, though, for good, and I guess that's what you're really seeing and wanting to do.
Absolutely, and it's not that social media is bad in itself. It's a tool, and we can absolutely use it for good. The reach that you are having through your online platforms is incredible. Yeah. And a lot of that's through online or through broadcasting. So it's not bad, but it's just, we all have to remember that we need to use this for good, and we need to use this to point people to God.
And I think the thing that I appreciate your enthusiasm, because we're in a time, I think, where there's a lot of darkness, but this is an amazing time to bring light, and I know that's your desire in this book.
Absolutely.
All right, Justin, I appreciate your enthusiasm. The name of the book is More Than Liked. You hit the little like thing on there. Staying true to you in a social media obsessed generation, and isn't that true? And if you'd like to get a hold of Justin's book, the coordinates are on the screen. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll be back with more 100 Huntley Street right after this.
Get inspired with daily Advent devotionals on hope, peace, joy, and love. Go to crossroads.ca/Advent right now and sign up for your free daily Advent emails.
And you are going to want to get your copy of this month's Reach magazine with the Advent devotional. So many familiar faces that you know from this program have written their thoughts on how to go through Advent, and what a gift to just follow along with us every day as we do it on air and through the Reach magazine. You can go to crossroads.ca to get your copy. Well, it's debilitating and incurable. Alzheimer's or dementia has affected 750,000 Canadians and more than 44 million people worldwide. The rates are as high as 1 in 3 for those who are over the age of 85. Although treatments can help slow the disease, it's extremely rare for an Alzheimer patient to see their symptoms totally reverse. Recently, Lorna Duick met someone who had this very thing happen. Here's an excerpt from Marriott's story.
My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2012, I believe. And for us, it meant really just dropping everything and trying to figure out what her needs were, to understand what the disease was. And I was losing her. Her mind was deteriorating, as I said, and I didn't think she would last the year. I didn't think she was going to make it. Shortly thereafter, she did have a fall, a significant fall, where she broke her neck, and she ended up again in ICU in hospital, and they repaired her neck.
And I remember praying at her bedside and just asking God for mercy in bringing her back, and it was a long journey, but then she came back, and suddenly she was getting so much better, and not just physically, but also cognitively.
Tell me why you think this is a miracle.
When I look today at the people with Alzheimer's and think that I was like that, and I was even much worse than that, because I went down to 0, and they're not the one I see, they're not down to 0. And I say, there's no way I could get out of that by myself. No way. With no intervention by God. It has to be God. It's a miracle, because nothing else would take me out of there.
It's hard to believe that this happens. It's hard to believe that somebody comes back from this. So yeah, it's a miracle for sure. No question.
Leaving the hospital that day, I had to phone our kids. And say, I've got some bad news.
There is one thing that has always helped people overcome unbearable circumstances: prayer. With thousands of people reaching into our prayer lines for help and for healing, we can rely on one truth: Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever.
So the question Dr. Nell DeBoer and I set out to answer in our book, For Your Health, is how can we access God's methods for healing? Our book shines a light on biblical context of God healing humanity while also giving you scientific proof for miraculous healing. We give you awe-inspiring case studies of individuals who have defied medical odds through Jesus' power to heal us. And when we put the mystery of God, obedience to prayer, and broken health into spiritual practice, even our biggest weakness can become our greatest strength. So I pray this book will fortify you in faith. It'll inspire you to pray, to put your trust in God, and it will be healing to you, allowing God to comfort, encourage, and affect you for your health.
Call 1-800-265-3100 or donate online at crossroads.ca/donate.
Are you finding these stories of healing as encouraging as I am? I think they're amazing. This book, For Your Health, is full of stories just like the one you just saw with Mariette that will help you explore whether healing is real and whether it applies to your life. Well, up next, a mom desperate to help her young son with mental health issues. Here's Greg in our Calgary studios with his guest.
Mental illness is a huge issue in this country, and according to Statistics Canada, 1 in 5 Canadians will experience a form of mental illness at some point in their life. And for those with more severe cases, the effects on them and their families can be devastating and very difficult. Connie Jacob knew early on there was something just not quite right with her son Ben, and by the age of 5, he was diagnosed with several things, including anxiety, depression, and Asperger's. At that point, Connie and her husband knew they were facing some hard years ahead as their son became more aggressive and angry. Connie, welcome to 100 Huntley Street.
Thanks for having me.
So your son is born, you're excited, you're raising this little guy. When did you suspect things were just a little off?
You know, about 18 months to 4. My husband and I just thought, man, this parenting thing is really indeed hard. But it wasn't until our second one was born, when my oldest was 4, and we realized a lot of the things that our youngest was doing was very different. It was much more relaxed, and so that's when we realized there must be something a little off here.
What were some of the symptoms? Because a lot of time when there's depression, it can be a sadness and, you know, kind of pulling back. But with Ben, it was the other direction. He was more aggressive.
Yes, more angry, more oppositional. And it wasn't just strong will. It was so much further than that. And so that was our 2 keys, anger and opposition.
So you get him diagnosed at the age of 6. What were you thinking at that point? Like, we're in for a long road here, or how were you processing?
Well, we wanted answers. We just needed to know what we were dealing with. So that we could know how to respond. Because at that point, we were trying everything. We read every parenting book, and nothing was working. And so once we had that diagnosis, we felt like there's a starting place.
So at the age of 8, he is even suicidal. What was going on at that time?
Well, that was really hard. And I work in resilience with youth for the past 20 years. And here I am, doing school programs, talking about mental health, and here's my own son. I'm able to help everyone else but him. And I think it's because parenting children with any kind of mental illness is harder than just guiding them. And so when he would be asked to put on his shoes because he has different things that are going on in his brain, I would have to say it sometimes 10 times. And by the 10th time, I'm yelling. So I feel like my son spent the first 8 years of his life being yelled at. And he didn't hear the times when it was nice. He heard the times when Mom got angry today. That's what he heard. And so I feel like all of the things that led up to him feeling like, well, I don't know how to handle my big emotions. I don't know what this sadness is. I don't know why I can't focus. I don't know why in school I'm having a hard time too. He was just hit everywhere. School, it was hard. Home, it was hard. And I think he just had it and didn't know how to deal with it.
How were you doing at that time, you know, as a follower of Jesus? Were you feeling guilty? Are you feeling maybe I don't have enough faith, or what have I done wrong?
Yeah, so much shame. So much shame. And shame is a bully. It'll just beat you down. What's wrong with me? Do I not have enough faith? Jesus, where are you? Why is my son struggling? Why us? What's going on? Just so many questions. I honestly felt really distraught, felt a lot of despair in those years.
So what did you do? Eventually you go to the Calgary Children's Hospital, and what are they saying, and how are you handling it?
Well, so we finally were able to see a psychiatrist, and she said, if your son is ever threatening his life, you have to take him to the Children's Hospital.
Okay.
So that's what we did. We took him there, and we had no idea what that was going to be like. We didn't know how long he would be there or what was going to happen. We had no idea.
How are you getting through this? Because that, you know, often puts a lot of pressure on a marriage too.
Oh, I'm surprised our marriage has survived. I really am. It is very hard. You're both exhausted. You will blame each other.
So there was a lot of conflict going on.
Oh, you'll blame each other. You'll blame yourself. You'll blame your child. You always want to pinpoint it on someone or something, when a lot of times there really isn't anywhere to pinpoint.
Okay, Connie, when we come back, we're going to talk about something that changed just the whole way you thought and parented, and even about God, when we return with Connie Jacob on 100 Huntley Street.
When you're in crisis, you don't have time to read, to research. Even going to a doctor's appointment can seem like a really, really big deal, because you're in crisis. You're just trying to survive the day.
And we're back with Connie Jacob talking about her son Ben, who is struggling with mental illness, finally getting a diagnosis that he needs some help. So when you're going through this, Connie, what were you thinking about? Like, is this the rest of my life going to be like this?
That is totally what you're thinking. This is so hard, and I don't know how I'm going to make it as well. Because when you're in crisis, you don't have time to read, to research. Even going to a doctor's appointment can seem like a really, really big deal, because you're in crisis. You're just trying to survive the day.
Now, you said that your marriage was, things were really tense. You also had another son. How did you try to bring some peace and normality into the home?
You know, that's a really good question. I feel like that's God's grace. If I look back, I don't know how we did it, but I know how He did it. He really sustained us. There's no other explanation. He was the only way we made it.
So you go to a counselor, and this counselor says something to you that the light bulb went off, and it had a profound effect. Your personal life, your marriage with God. Tell me what that moment was like and what was said.
So when we brought him to the hospital, the psychologist took me aside and said, so when your son is throwing fits of rage, because that's what they would look like, depression for him was not sadness, it was anger. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I would send him to his room. So that's what I told her. I told her he could go to his room, and when he was ready to be a good boy, calm, he could come out. And she said something so powerful to me. She said, we never send the hurting away. We bring them closer. And it just hit me like, wow, that's what God does with us. That's how He heals us. He doesn't send us away to deal with our problems and come back all fixed and good. He literally, we're healed in His arms. And so for the next year, when my son would throw a fit of rage, I would stay in the same room with him. And it was hard. It was extremely uncomfortable. I mean, he is saying things that I'm not comfortable with. He's throwing things. I'm wondering if I'm going to be okay. But I would just say, son, I've got you. Nothing will separate me from you. You are so loved. You belong in our home. And it took a year of consistently doing that. And now all I'd have to do is put my arm around him, and he just melts because he knows that he's held.
Wow. He's 11 now. How's Ben doing?
He's doing great. He still has his diagnosis of anxiety and depression, but he's back in school. Because I had to homeschool him for a year and a half. He's just a normal boy. You would never guess that he has this diagnosis. And so I'm so happy. And I mean, he's 11, so now we're going into normal teenage stuff.
Yeah, those are difficult enough. Connie, what would you say to parents that are dealing with a child that is, dealing with some of the things that Ben has, and what are the encouragement and resources, I think, as well, and so important for families that are dealing with these mental health issues?
Oh, and that's huge. The person who had to change the most in our house was me. I had to get a grip on my philosophy of parenting, this idea of sending away. That wasn't working. So connection first. That child needs to know that they belong. And that's going to be so hard because it feels like we're agreeing with them. At first, when the psychologist told me that, I'm like, but I don't agree with this behavior whatsoever.
You feel like you're rewarding this behavior, right?
Yes, but it works. Connection first. Bring them closer. Don't let them go. Look at yourself in the mirror. I realized that my dysregulation, when my son would become angry and furious, I wouldn't become angry and furious, but my intensity would rise. And I noticed that I react. And so I had to ask God to help me to become a peaceful parent that could just sit in the middle of a storm and not move.
Wow.
And that was huge. It still is huge. I still, to this day, ask for God's grace in that, just to be an even keel parent. Bring them closer, look at ourselves in the mirror, and ask God to help us change the things that we need, because the environment is what can either escalate these things or it can just keep them under wraps, and God can do amazing work.
And there's some good resources as well.
Yeah, so we started a website actually for parents that are in crisis or just everyday parents. It's called Village, and I'm working with a psychologist, and we just wanted information to be accessible, right on the spot, and things that would be relevant for parents today.
And you're also a speaker. You've written a couple books. Tell me about those.
Yeah, so Culture Rebel, because the world has enough desperate housewives.
Okay.
I wrote that because I realized becoming a mom, I was trying to prove to the world that I could still succeed and do everything. And so it's a callback to what's important. And then When the Dead Live is all about the gospel. What is the gospel? Isaiah 61 is pretty much a wrap-up of that book right there.
Well, Connie, thank you for coming in and sharing your story with us, and I know you're going to give hope to other people. So, again, the parenting journey is not easy.
No.
Whatever cards are dealt to us, we try to, do the best we can. So, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And and the important part of the community that we have, and maybe you don't have people in your community that can help you at this point. We have wonderful prayer partners always standing by, and they can point you in the right direction. So give us a call, 1-866-273-4444. We'll be right back.
I hope you've been tracking with us this week, a critically important week, this topic of how to find courage within crisis. Again, just say the word crisis, and we all know what that means in so many different forms. We're studying 2 Chronicles chapter 20. I love this chapter, the story of Jehoshaphat, and the enemies are coming against God's people in Israel, and they are afraid. The text says they are afraid, which encourages us, because sometimes fear is a reality. So what do they do in the midst of crisis? Well, this is what we're walking through, and we want to apply it to our own lives. Let's recap where we've been this week, okay? Here's the key to find courage in the midst of crisis. Number one, you got to seek the Lord. I mean, where else are you going to go? Again, the Lord holds all strength and power and might and love. You start by seeking the Lord. Secondly, power through prayer. Talking to Him, going to Him, depending upon Him. And again, Lord, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on You right in this text here this week. Then we find strength through standing. The prophet came along and said, hey, God's people, all you got to do is hold your position. Stand. Don't run away. Don't give up. It's God's battle, not your own. And then today, we see this. We see victory through believing. And that takes us to our passage today. And we see in verse 18, I'll just read it for us and explain a little bit. And says this, then Jehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground. And listen, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell down before the Lord, worshiping the Lord. How's that for spiritual leadership? Jehoshaphat the king, he bows down, he leads the way, and the whole nation follows in suit to come before the Lord and to seek his face and to believe in his victory. I mean, that's such great leadership. You're a leader over some people. All of us are in some form, in some way. Look at this. I mean, any ounce of leadership within us, you're like, yeah, look at that. He's seeking the Lord. He's obeying the Lord. He's believing in the Lord. He falls on his face before the Lord, and the whole country follows in suit. And then it says in verse 19, and the Levites and the Kohathites and the Korahites stood up to praise the Lord with a very loud voice. And here's the message for today. Here's what was said. In verse 20, it says this. Ready? Believe in the Lord your God, and you will be established. That's a word for someone right now today, in your context right now. Believe in the Lord your God, you will be established. Notice again, believe his prophets, and here's the promise, and you will succeed. We find victory through faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, it says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. God is not interested in our effort. He's not interested in our works. He's interested in his grace and our faith applied to his might, his grace, his love within our lives. It's incredible, the power of believing. Again, right in our text today, you want to have courage within crisis? It comes with faith, trusting in the Lord, not ourselves. That's for you and me right now. Apply that to your life right now. Here's a quote I saw on a church sign a couple of weeks ago. It said this, and I loved it. Doubt creates mountains. That's so true. But faith removes them. And how biblical that is all throughout the Gospels. God is calling us to faith today, loved ones, in the midst of discouragement, despair, in the midst of even depression. Faith in the Lord and his love for you. What a perfect time to call our prayer lines. 1-866-273-4444. Right there, call us now. Let us love you, and let's walk together by faith in the strength of God.
Thanks so much, Robbie. What a really cool theme today, courage in crisis. You look at your interview with Connie Jacob, her son with mental illness, and how much courage it took for her to change her own behavior. I put myself in her shoes and I think, would I have been able to be calm and loving while my son or daughter is having just flipping out with a fit?
Well, Connie said that it wasn't always peaceful, but she had to learn. But to me, if there's one thing that I took away from the show, and there's many things, but I can hardly say it because I get emotional, but don't send the hurting away. You know, you're not coming to this room until you're a good boy. And she took that year just to embrace him. And that's the way our God is with us, our Father in heaven. If you've not experienced that embrace, God's not turning you away and saying, I'm done with you. No, he's saying, I love you and I want you to come to me because he's come to us. So give our prayer partners a call and they'll introduce you to the God of heaven if you don't know him. 1-866-273-4444.
There's this verse in the Bible that says we come boldly to his throne of grace.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're hurting, it's the hardest thing to do to run to God and not from God. But that's where healing lies. You know, we're talking about healing this month.
Yeah.
You want to get healing, run to God.
Well, thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. God bless.
Bye.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a member of the Canadian Council of Christian Charities. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 4M2.
Cheryl Weber's wardrobe provided by Melanie Lynn.